All right, so welcome to another deep dive. And today we're going to be doing something a little different.
Ooh.
We're going to be exploring applied behavioral analysis, or ABA for short,
Okay.
through the lens of Italian expertise.
Interesting.
So we have some excerpts from an Italian textbook called Le ABC del comportamento, which basically means like the ABCs of behavior.
Right.
And we also have the CV of the author of this textbook, Olimpia Sinfarosa.
That's great.
So using these sources, we're going to be kind of getting a unique perspective on this field.
It's not every day that we
Yeah.
get to see how these concepts are understood and practiced in another culture, so I'm really excited to see what we discover.
Yeah, me too, me too.
Yeah.
So to get us started, I was hoping you could give us a clear definition of what ABA actually is.
Sure.
Because the textbook dives right in. But I think it would be helpful for our listeners to
Right.
unpack it a little bit.
Absolutely. So ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis, it's a science, and it's dedicated to understanding and improving what we call socially significant behaviors.
Okay.
So, behaviors that have an impact on people's lives.
So it's not just any behavior, it's behavior that...
Yeah, it's not just like, how many times someone blinks.
Right, right.
It's meaning. Yeah, it has meaning, exactly.
Yeah.
And what sets ABA apart is its focus on
Okay.
using systematic procedures
Okay.
and experiments to figure out
Okay.
what environmental variables are actually causing those behavior changes.
I see, I see. So you're not just observing behavior,
Right.
but you're really trying to get at like the root of like, why is this happening?
The why, exactly.
And then how can you use that knowledge
Exactly.
to actually create
change.
change? Yeah.
Meaningful change.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a very hands-on practical science.
I think that's something we can all relate to because everyone has something they'd like to improve about themselves or maybe something they'd like to change.
Totally. Like you could think about it, if you're trying to break a bad habit.
Yeah.
ABA can help you figure out, like, what are those triggers? What are those things that are making you do that habit?
Right.
And then help you come up with strategies to overcome them.
Now that's what I call practical knowledge. Yeah.
It's all about empowerment.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. So speaking of expertise, let's talk about our source material here.
Sure.
The author of the textbook,
Okay.
Olimpia Sinfarosa.
Mm-hmm.
She has pretty serious credentials.
Yeah, she does.
Her CV mentions certifications like BCBA
Right.
and EDC.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know BCBA, that's a board-certified behavior analyst,
Yes.
which is a big deal, I'm assuming.
It is. That's like the gold standard for ABA professionals, so it's a globally recognized certification.
Okay, so it's not just something that's recognized in Italy.
No, it's international.
Oh.
So it shows a high level of competence and expertise in the field.
And what about the ADC?
Yeah, the ADC is actually specific to Italy.
Oh.
It stands for Analista del Comportamento,
Okay.
which essentially translates to, behavior analyst. So
Okay.
it's kind of like their equivalent of the BCBA.
So she's got both.
She has both, which is very impressive.
Yeah.
It shows her commitment to, maintaining those high professional standards, both internationally and within Italy.
And her CV also highlights her experience working with
Yes.
children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders.
Yeah, that's a very common area where ABA principles are applied.
Okay.
And in Italy, Olimpia is really considered a leader in this area.
Wow.
She's using ABA to help these individuals develop essential skills and improve their quality of life.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see how this science is really making a tangible difference
It's really inspiring.
in people's lives,
Yeah, it's not just theory. It's actually making a real impact.
Yeah, so it's not just about like, studying behavior in a lab. It's about like actually...
about helping people in their everyday lives.
Okay, cool. So let's dive into some of the core principles of ABA then.
Absolutely.
Okay, so in chapter 4 of the textbook,
Okay.
Olimpia introduces this concept of contingency, a 3 termini, which translates to...
Which basically means antecedent behavior consequence, or what we often call the ABCs.
Right, the ABCs of behavior.
Of behavior, yeah.
I'm curious, so does this concept, is it used in any unique ways in Italy based on what you see in the textbook?
Yeah, what's interesting is the textbook emphasizes that you have to consider cultural factors when you're applying this ABC model.
Okay.
So she gives some examples
that
are very specific to Italian culture.
Okay.
Like using certain gestures or phrases as antecedents.
Oh, okay, so like things that
might be very common
Yeah.
in Italian interactions.
Right.
but wouldn't necessarily be universal.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it really highlights how you can adapt these principles to different cultural contexts.
That's real cool.
But still maintain the effectiveness of those core principles.
Okay, so can you break down this ABC principle then for our listeners?
Sure.
I'm all about making these concepts practical and easy to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's all about understanding this kind of chain of events that surrounds behavior.
Okay.
So the antecedent is what happens before the behavior.
Okay.
The behavior is the action itself.
Right.
And the consequence is what happens immediately after.
Okay.
Think of it like dominoes.
Okay.
One event kind of triggers the next.
So, like if I wanted to encourage myself to drink more water, I could keep a full water bottle on my desk as the antecedent.
Yeah.
The behavior would be actually drinking the water. And the consequence could be the feeling of refreshment and hydration.
Exactly. And then you're more likely to drink water again in the future.
Right, because you're like, oh, this feels good.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so it's all about understanding that chain of events and then
manipulating it to your advantage.
Okay.
So you can increase the behaviors you want and decrease the ones you don't.
Now, the textbook also talks about using clear, complete, and objective definitions.
Yes, very important.
When you're describing behaviors,
absolutely,
what are some common mistakes that people make when they're trying to define behaviors?
So one of the biggest mistakes is being too vague.
Okay.
Right. So, for example, saying that someone is angry doesn't really tell us much. We need to describe what are those specific behaviors that are showing us that they're angry.
So give me an example.
Like yelling, frowning, clenching their fists.
Okay, yeah. So instead of saying someone's lazy, you might say didn't complete assigned tasks or spend excessive time on social media instead of working.
Yes, because then we can measure that.
Right.
We can actually see it.
It's observable.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. And then the textbook also makes a distinction between topographical and functional definitions.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on those a bit?
Absolutely. So imagine you're observing a coworker who's constantly tapping their pen on the desk during meetings.
Okay, I've seen that.
Right. A topographical definition would just describe what you see.
Okay.
So the tapping itself.
Okay, just the tapping.
Yeah, but a functional definition would go deeper.
Okay.
And ask, what purpose is that tapping serving for this person?
Okay.
So is it helping them focus?
Right.
Are they releasing nervous energy?
I see.
Right. So it's understanding the why behind the what.
That's a really important distinction because then you can actually get to the root of the behavior.
Exactly. You're not just treating the symptom.
Right.
You're treating the underlying cause.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And speaking of underlying causes, the textbook talks about this concept of the
ambiente comportamentale,
which is basically like the behavioral environment, right?
Exactly.
So how does this idea kind of play into how we understand behavior?
So this concept highlights that our surroundings, both internal and external, have a huge impact on our actions.
I see. So it's not just what's going on inside my head, but it's also the physical space that I'm in.
Exactly.
Of people that I'm around.
The social context. Exactly. So it's like being a detective, looking for clues in the environment to understand why people behave the way they do.
Okay. And is there anything else about this behavioral environment concept that you want to highlight?
Yeah. The textbook actually connects this concept to something called setting events.
Oh, okay.
So these are like those broader contextual factors that can influence behavior, even if they're not immediately present.
So give me an example.
Like imagine a student who has a fight with their parents before school.
Okay.
Even though that fight happened outside the classroom, it might still affect their behavior at school.
Right. They might be more irritable.
Exactly.
Or withdrawn,
Yeah, so it's like these hidden influences that we might not even be aware of.
But that are shaping...
But they're having a big impact.
Our actions and reactions.
Absolutely.
This is so interesting because it's really making me think about all these
these layers.
Yeah, these layers and how they interact.
Yeah.
To create like...
The complexity of human behavior.
Yes, yeah, the complexity of human behavior, yeah.
Exactly.
So before we move on, I want our listeners to think about a behavior that they'd like to change in themselves.
Okay.
Maybe they want to start exercising more. Or maybe they want to procrastinate less as we continue exploring. I want you to kind of keep that behavior in mind.
Okay.
And see if you can identify those hidden antecedents, the setting events, the consequences
that
might be influencing your actions.
It's a great way to start applying these concepts to your own life.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of applied behavioral analysis.
Yeah, I'm excited to keep going. Last time we were talking about how those antecedents and setting events kind of set the stage for behavior.
Right.
But now I really want to talk about consequences.
Yes, consequences are really at the heart of
Okay.
how we learn and change our behavior.
Okay.
They're basically what determines whether we are likely to repeat an action or avoid it in the future.
It's like that classic saying, you know, we learn from our mistakes.
Right.
But I feel like there's more nuance to it than that.
There definitely is.
Okay.
So in ABA, we break down consequences into two main categories: reinforcement and punishment.
Okay, so let's start with reinforcement.
Sure.
Can you give me some examples of how reinforcement is used in everyday life?
Absolutely.
Maybe even, you know, drawing on some of those Italian examples from Olimpia Sinfarosa's book.
Yeah, so imagine a barista in Italy who makes a perfect cappuccino.
Okay.
And they receive a generous tip. That tip is a positive reinforcer.
Okay.
And it increases the likelihood that they'll continue to put extra care into their craft.
Right, because they're like, oh, I got rewarded for that.
Exactly.
I'm going to keep doing that.
Yeah, they want that tip again.
Yeah.
But reinforcement doesn't always have to be tangible rewards like money.
Okay.
You know, Olimpia's book really emphasizes the power of social reinforcement, especially in Italian culture.
Okay, like what?
So things like a smile, a nod of approval, a heartfelt grazie.
Oh, yeah.
These can be incredibly reinforcing.
I love that.
Yeah. It reminds us that even those small acts of kindness can have a big impact.
Yeah, they do. They do.
On behavior.
Okay, but you mentioned different types of reinforcement.
Right.
So what's the difference between positive and negative reinforcement?
Okay, so positive reinforcement is about adding something desirable to the environment after a behavior to make it more likely to happen again.
Okay, so give me an example.
Like a child who receives a sticker for completing their homework.
Okay.
The sticker is something they enjoy.
Right.
It's added to the environment.
Okay.
And it makes it more likely they'll do their homework again.
I see. So it's all about adding something positive.
Right.
To increase the likelihood of that behavior.
Exactly.
Okay, so then what about negative reinforcement?
Okay, negative reinforcement is often a little tricky to grasp.
Right, because the word negative makes it sound like a bad thing.
Yeah, but it's not about punishment at all.
Oh.
Negative reinforcement is about removing something aversive or unpleasant from the environment after a behavior.
Okay.
And that also increases the likelihood of that behavior happening again.
Give me an example.
So think about fastening your seatbelt in a car.
Okay.
That annoying beeping sound stops when you buckle up.
Yeah.
So the removal of that aversive sound is what reinforces the behavior of buckling your seatbelt.
Okay, so it's not adding something negative, it's taking away something that was negative.
It's already there.
Right. Okay.
And it's causing discomfort.
I see.
So you remove it.
I think I'm starting to get it.
Good.
Okay, so then what about punishment?
All right, so punishment...
Is it as scary as it sounds?
It's often misunderstood.
Okay.
Punishment is simply a consequence that decreases the likelihood of a behavior happening again.
Okay.
And just like with reinforcement, there's positive punishment and negative punishment.
Okay, break it down for me.
All right, so positive punishment involves adding something aversive to the environment to decrease a behavior. Okay.
So imagine a child who runs into a busy street.
Okay, yeah.
A parent might scold the child for this dangerous behavior.
Right.
The scolding is something the child finds unpleasant.
Right.
And it's added to the environment to discourage them from running into the street again.
Okay, so it's not about being mean or anything.
No, it's about
teaching them.
It's about safety.
Yeah, okay.
And Olimpia's book actually talks about this.
Okay.
She has a whole section on the ethical considerations of using punishment.
Okay.
And she really emphasizes that it should always be a last resort.
Okay.
And that it should be used in conjunction with reinforcement.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you're teaching and reinforcing those safe behaviors.
Right. So you're not just punishing the bad, you're
rewarding the good.
Rewarding the good.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what about negative punishment?
Okay, so negative punishment involves removing something desirable from the environment.
To decrease a behavior.
Okay.
So think about a teenager who loses their video game privileges for not completing their chores.
Yeah.
The removal of something enjoyable.
Right.
those video games serves as a negative punisher.
Okay.
And makes it less likely they'll neglect their chores again.
Okay, so we've covered reinforcement and punishment.
Yes.
Both positive and negative.
We have.
It's a lot, but I feel like I'm starting to see the patterns here.
Good.
Is there anything else you want to highlight about these concepts before we move on?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that what's reinforcing or punishing for one person might not be the same for another.
Right, we're all different.
Exactly, we're all unique.
Okay.
So a thorough assessment is crucial.
Okay.
You need to understand the individual before you can develop effective interventions.
Okay, yeah, so it's not just like a one-size-fits-all approach.
No, not at all.
Okay, that makes sense. And speaking of making sure things are effective, what about data collection?
Yes, data is crucial.
Okay, so how do we make sure that we're collecting data in a way that's actually meaningful and useful?
So there are many different methods of data collection, depending on what you're trying to measure.
Okay.
So you might use frequency recording to track how often a behavior occurs, duration recording to see how long a behavior lasts, or interval recording to see if a behavior happens within specific time intervals.
Okay.
And Olimpia's book gives examples of when to use each of these methods.
Okay, so it's all about choosing the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
But then what happens after you collect all that data?
Right, so that's where data analysis comes in.
Yeah, okay.
So we use graphs and charts to visualize the data and look for patterns.
Okay, so it's not just about collecting numbers.
No, it's about understanding what those numbers mean and seeing those trends.
So it's like being a detective again.
Right.
You're looking for clues.
Exactly, to see if the interventions are working.
I like that. Okay.
And make adjustments if needed.
So is there anything else about this data collection and analysis that you want to emphasize?
Yeah, one thing that's really important is fidelity of implementation.
What does that mean?
So that means making sure that the interventions are being implemented consistently and accurately.
Okay, so like if we're saying we're going to reinforce this behavior every time it happens, we actually have to do it.
You have to do it. Otherwise, the data is meaningless.
Right. It's like if you're following a recipe.
Exactly.
If you leave out a key ingredient.
It's not going to work.
Yeah. Or change the cooking time.
Yeah.
It's not going to come out the way it's supposed to.
Exactly. And that's why training and supervision are so important. You want to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Right. Doing it right.
Doing it right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm feeling a lot more confident in my understanding of consequences.
Good.
And the role of data.
Good.
So can you remind us of that behavior that we asked our listeners to think about?
Yes. We asked you to think about a behavior you want to start doing more often or a habit you'd like to break.
Right.
So as we keep exploring ABA, I want you to apply these concepts to that behavior.
Of reinforcement, punishment, data collection.
Yes.
Okay.
See if you can identify those antecedents, those consequences, those setting events.
Good.
That might be influencing your actions.
That's a good exercise. I like that.
Yeah.
All right. So welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of applied behavioral analysis. And I have to say, I feel like I've learned so much.
It's a fascinating field.
It is.
It really is.
So today, I'm really excited to dive into what I like to call the toolbox of ABA.
Okay.
So all those specific techniques that are used to help people make those positive changes.
The tools of the trade.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So where do we start?
Let's start with shaping.
Okay, shaping.
So shaping is a technique that's used to teach new complex behaviors by breaking them down into smaller, more manageable steps.
Okay, so it's kind of like...
Think about training for a marathon.
Okay.
You wouldn't expect to run 26 miles.
Right, not in your first...
On your first try, you would start with shorter distances.
Right, build up to it.
And gradually increase the mileage as you get stronger.
Okay, so instead of overwhelming someone with like this huge goal, you're breaking it down.
Break it down.
And celebrating those small wins along the way.
Yes, celebrate those milestones.
Okay.
That keeps people motivated.
Now, are there any like Italian examples of shaping in Olimpia Sinfarosa's book?
She actually talks about using shaping to teach children traditional Italian cooking techniques.
Oh, wow. Okay, like what?
So, for example, instead of expecting a child to perfectly shape and fill ravioli...
Right, on their first try.
You might start by having them help roll out the dough.
Okay, yeah.
And then gradually introduce those more complex steps like cutting the dough, filling it, and so on.
But that's a great example.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a practical skill.
No, yeah.
You're also passing down a tradition.
Exactly. Cultural transmission through shaping.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got shaping. Now, what about chaining?
Okay, so chaining is similar to shaping.
Okay.
In that you're breaking down a complex behavior into smaller steps. But the focus here is on the sequence of those steps.
Okay, so the order matters.
The order matters.
Gotcha.
It's like assembling a piece of furniture.
Okay.
You have to follow a specific order of operations.
To get the final product.
To get the desired outcome.
Oh, okay, I see. So like one step leads to the next.
It's like a chain reaction.
Okay, so are there different types of chaining?
Yes, there's forward chaining and backward chaining.
Okay, what's the difference?
So in forward chaining,
okay,
you start with the first step in the sequence.
Okay.
And you teach it to mastery before moving on.
Okay, so like with the furniture assembly,
yeah,
you wouldn't move on to attaching the legs until the tabletop was done.
Exactly. But with backward chaining, you actually start with the last step.
Okay, that's interesting.
And work your way backward.
Okay, and why would you do it that way?
So that can be really helpful for individuals who benefit from a sense of completion.
Okay.
Or who might find it discouraging to start at the beginning and have to wait so long to see that final outcome.
So it's like with the furniture assembly, you'd help them do that last screw.
Yes.
And then gradually give them more responsibility.
Until they can do the whole thing themselves.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've got shaping for building new behaviors, chaining for linking them together.
Yes.
Now, what about those times when someone needs a little extra help?
That's where prompting comes in.
Okay, prompting.
So prompting is a way of providing additional support to help someone perform a behavior.
Okay, so it's like giving them a nudge in the right direction.
A gentle nudge, exactly.
Okay.
And there are different types of prompts.
Okay, like what?
You might use a verbal prompt, like a reminder or instruction.
Okay.
Or a visual prompt, like a picture or a gesture.
Okay.
Sometimes you might even use a physical prompt, where you're physically guiding them through the behavior.
Okay, so like if you're teaching someone to tie their shoes,
you
might start with like hand over hand.
Exactly.
And then eventually just tell them what to do.
And then fade those prompts as they become more independent.
So it's like a scaffold.
Yes, like a scaffold.
That you gradually take away.
As the building gets stronger.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about techniques for teaching new behaviors. But I know ABA also has tools for addressing challenging behaviors.
Absolutely.
So what are some of those?
One of the most effective is called differential reinforcement.
Differential reinforcement, okay.
So it's all about reinforcing desired behaviors. While reducing reinforcement for those undesired behaviors.
Okay, so you're kind of shifting the balance.
Shifting the balance towards the positive.
Towards the positive.
So those positive behaviors become more rewarding. And therefore more likely to happen.
Okay, and are there different types of differential reinforcement?
Yes, there are.
Okay.
So there's DRA, which stands for differential reinforcement of alternative behavior.
Okay, what does that mean?
So that's where you reinforce a specific alternative behavior that serves the same function as that challenging behavior.
So give me an example.
Like if a child is calling out in class to get attention, you might ignore the calling out, but then shower them with praise when they raise their hand quietly.
Okay, so you're basically saying, hey, this is the behavior that gets you what you want. So let's focus on that.
Right. You're giving them a better way.
Okay. I really like that.
Yeah.
It's a very positive approach.
It is.
So before we completely wrap up our exploration, can you just remind us again why data is so crucial?
Data is the backbone of ABA. It lets us track progress. Make those data-driven decisions and ensure that the interventions are actually working.
So it's like a roadmap?
It's a roadmap for change. You can see where you've been, where you are now, and where you need to go.
I like that.
Yeah.
This has been such an incredible deep dive.
I agree.
I feel like I've learned so much.
It's been a journey.
It has.
Yeah.
So before we go, is there anything else that you want to leave our listeners with?
You know, ABA is more than just a set of techniques. It's a way of thinking about behavior that can empower us to create positive change in our own lives and in the lives of others.
Beautifully said, yeah.
Yeah.
So for our listeners,
yes,
remember that behavior that we talked about earlier, the one that you want to change as you go about your day?
Yeah.
See if you can notice those antecedents. Those consequences.
Yes.
Those setting events.
Environmental factors.
Yeah, and just see how they might be influencing
your actions.
Your actions.
And your thoughts.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
You might be.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Been a pleasure.
Into the world of applied behavioral analysis.
Absolutely.
And until next time, keep learning.
Keep exploring.
Keep questioning and keep diving deep.
Absolutely.